They said she died suddenly. They said it was natural. They said there was nothing to see, and for a few days, that's exactly what everyone believed. Until a mother began asking questions. Until a grave was reopened. And until a jury was asked to listen. Not to a ghost story, but to a woman who refused to let silence stand in for truth. This is not folklore. This is not legend. This is a murder case reported in newspapers across America. And it begins on an ordinary winter morning. In January of 1897, Greenbrier County, West Virginia, was quiet. Newspapers of the time describe it as rural, close-knit, the kind of place where news traveled by word of mouth before it ever reached print. Zona Heaster Shue was a young woman living there with her husband, Edward Shue, sometimes called Trout in local papers. They had been married only a few months. According to neighbors, Zona was gentle, reserved, soft-spoken. Her husband was not. Very little was written about Edward Shue's life before he arrived in Greenbrier County, and that silence itself invites questions. Newspaper accounts focused on what could be documented: his marriages, his work, his presence in the community, but they offered almost nothing about how he lived before Zona, how he was regarded elsewhere, or what his earlier marriages had been like day to day. Some papers described him as a blacksmith, a skilled trade that carried a certain standing in rural communities. Others referred to him more loosely as a day laborer. The inconsistency was not unusual for the time, but it leaves an incomplete picture, one that feels unfinished. Edward Shue had already been married twice before. Both marriages had ended. One wife had died, another marriage had dissolved, under unclear circumstances. Later accounts would note that at least one report claimed abuse in a previous marriage. Those claims were never fully examined in court, and the newspapers did not pursue them deeply. They exist in the record, but without detail, without corroboration, and without resolution. But people noticed. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heaster, noticed most of all. She distrusted Edward from the beginning. That distrust would not fade. What Edward's life looked like before Zona, whether it was stable or unsettled, whether his temperament had already caused concern, or whether warning signs were simply overlooked, remains unknown. What is clear is that by the time Zona Heaster married him, Edward Shue was not a man without history. And once Zona was dead, that history, including the parts never fully recorded, began to matter in ways it never had before. In cases like this, the unanswered questions linger alongside the documented facts, and sometimes it is the silence in the record that draws the most attention. On January 23, 1897, Edward left his house to run errands. Later that day, he returned. What happened next appears in several newspapers, quietly without emphasis, but it matters. Edward did not go into the house himself. Instead, he went to a nearby residence and asked a young black boy to go check on his wife. Why? The papers don't explain. They simply report it. The boy went. Inside the house, he found Zona lying motionless. He ran back, frightened. Only then did Edward enter the home. Why didn't Edward go himself? Why send a child? That detail isn't explained in the papers. It's just there. And I keep coming back to those questions. Was it convenience, coincidence, or something else? The newspapers did not answer those questions. Let us know what you think in the comments section below. From the start, Edward's behavior unsettled people. Newspapers describe him as emotional, overly so. When the local doctor arrived, Edward did not step aside. He dressed Zona himself. He chose a high-collared dress. He wrapped a scarf tightly around her neck. He cradled her head constantly. When the doctor attempted to examine her throat, Edward objected. The examination was incomplete. Despite discoloration noted on her neck, the cause of death was recorded vaguely. First as everlasting faint, then later changed to childbirth complications. Some reports speculated pregnancy, but no examination ever confirmed it. The newspaper articles also don't explain why Edward was so insistent on controlling the body, the clothing, the viewing. They reported it, but they did not interpret it. That part is left to us. It was reported that Zona was buried quickly, and officially, that should have been the end. But people kept talking. Neighbors remembered arguments. Edward's temper, the scarf, the way he wouldn't let anyone near her head, and Mary Jane Heaster, Zona's mother, couldn't let it go. She washed one of the burial sheets, and it was said that the water turned red. It says Mary believed it was a sign. She prayed. And then, according to her sworn testimony, Zona came to her, not once, 4 times, over 4 consecutive nights. Mary Jane said her daughter told her exactly how she died, that Edward became angry, that he grabbed her by the neck, that he twisted her head violently, that he snapped her neck, that he pushed her down the stairs. And in the detail, newspapers would repeat nationwide. Mary Jane testified that the spirit turned her head completely around to demonstrate the injury. These were not rumors. They were statements given under oath. Still, the prosecutor did not act because of a ghost. He acted because something about the case did not add up, and a sense of unease from the community. An exhumation was ordered. Edward Shue was furious. The newspapers emphasized this. When Zona's body was examined, the truth was no longer hidden. Her neck was broken, her windpipe crushed. This was no faint, no complication, no issues with pregnancy. Edward Shue was arrested and charged with murder. At trial, the prosecution relied on medical findings and behavior. They avoided the supernatural entirely. But the defense made a fatal mistake. Attempting to discredit Mary Jane Heaster, they introduced her ghost testimony, and the jury listened. Edward Shue testified in his own defense. The reports describe his testimony as long, rambling, and ineffective. One paper states that it made an unfavorable impression. After closing arguments, the jury retired. Now here is where accuracy matters again. Some later retellings claim the jury deliberated for only an hour. Others say it took much longer. The newspapers themselves report that deliberation lasted several hours, closer to 4 than 1, and eventually they returned with a verdict: guilty of murder in the 1st degree. Edward Shue was sentenced to life in prison. He died there 3 years later during the flu epidemic of 1900. A motive was never definitively proven. No financial gain, no affair. Only accounts of temper, control, and violence. Officially, Edward Shue was not convicted because of a ghost. But without the ghost, there would have been no exhumation, no broken neck discovered, no trial. Today, a historical marker stands in Greenbrier County. It states, "This is the only known American murder case where testimony attributed to a ghost helped secure justice." Whether you believe in spirits or not, what's undeniable is this. Without Mary Heaster refusing to let the story end, Zona Heaster Shue would have remained a small paragraph in a forgotten column. Instead, she became part of history. If you've come across additional newspaper clippings, family records, or local accounts connected to this case, I'd genuinely like to hear about them. Stories like this don't survive because they're simple. They survive because people keep asking questions. And sometimes, the questions matter more than the answers. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoy this video. Please check other videos in the channel if this one interests you. Also, note that everything you have heard came from newspapers published at the time. Details may conflict, and later outcomes may not be included.